we'd get in the airplane at 3:30, 4 o'clock and run the engines and make sure they were warm, and then stand by. And this went on for 2 or 3 days, and then one day they said there's a target. And they gave us the heading and distance, and away we went, not knowing if it was a merchant ship, it was an aircraft carrier, or what it was. And we'd no more than cleared the island, and you could look up and see the Japanese Zeros and dive bombers in waves coming in to hit the little island of Midway, both Eastern Island and Sand Island. But we went on out and were down low, 50, 100 feet off the water, and suddenly popped over the horizon was a whole flock of Japanese ships. And they were everywhere. The first ones we encountered were destroyers. They're way out in front of the main battle fleet. And of course our course was such that we had to fly directly over top of them. Well, we were just buzz over top of the mast and back on the water and head for the next one, up over the top of it and down in the water. And our gunners were keeping busy, firing as we approached and as we left. But then the Zeros picked us up. And that's where the problems came in. The anti-aircraft fire was ineffective. Scary, absolutely scary, but ineffective. They, I don't think, hit our airplane, period. And I know they didn't hit one of the other ones. The other one that got back to the island wasn't hit by any aircraft fire. It was all Zeros. And in order to approach our target, which was the carrier, Akagi, at a 45-degree angle from the bow, we had to cross this great expanse of water where every ship fired their anti-aircraft guns. And that was a bad one because the big guns were shooting into the water, causing water spouts that we had to duck. And the Navy had instructed us that we had to drop at 150 miles an hour at 150 feet. Well, the airplane didn't fly 150 miles an hour. That was almost stall speed. So we were somewhat higher than that when we crossed this barrage area. And the Zeros, you've got to give them credit, were right with us. They went through that barrage area just the same as we did, and they were shooting us all the way through. And again, I can say that the anti-aircraft fire did not hit my airplane. I can't speak for the other two that were shot down. But our course took us, after our launch, the Akaga was turning toward us, and we had been coming in from 45 off the bow, so it was almost a straight shot down the flight deck, which was fortunate simply because every gun on the carrier was firing out and up, 45 degrees, and just steady fire. So anybody flying over the deck, that is across it, was going to get hit. There wasn't any question. But nobody had prepared for some airplane flying the full length of their deck. And that's where we went, down the deck, and in fact low enough that I think we could have touched the deck with our wheels if we had put them down. But I tried to climb out and get into the clouds when I left the deck. And those carriers were firing, I don't know what size guns, but great, huge fire going whistling by the cockpit. It was just balls of fire from the anti-aircraft. And they, of course, were tracers. And then on top of that, the Zeros were sitting, firing at us. So we didn't get into the clouds and had to go back down in the water. Well, by that time, the all the cushions in the back of the airplane were on fire. The gunners were shot up, and we had no defense except speed. And we got on the water. The co-pilot went back and used the tail gun and shot morphine into the wounded and so forth. And I sat there driving that machine with the throttles all the way to the hilt. Now, B-26 pilots will remember that our takeoff power was 49 inches of mercury. 50 was emergency. Well, we went by the 50, went across the space and started at 20, and we went on through 20 up to 30. So we were drawing somewhere, the Pratt & Whitney people figured, along about 80 inches of mercury on those engines with full RPM, and we're indicating about 320 miles an hour. Fast enough that a Zeros coming down out of dives could pull up alongside of us, but when they rolled up to fire through and try to shoot us out of the air, they just simply fell off, and we would go on. But we'd been shot up so bad that the airplane was flying a bit hazardously. It'd try to make a turn, and it'd want to fall off on us. The rudder was shaking and banging, and the engines were pounding pretty badly, which we didn't know was all the blades of the propellers were perforated. Some were hit with pretty big rounds because great gaping chunks of steel were torn out of those props, and just small slivers were left holding them on, which of course speaks well for the maker of the propeller. But we did finally get away from the Japanese Zeros. And then, of course, we were lost. Nobody was thinking about position or where was Midway or anything else. We were away from the Japanese fleet, and we had a lot of wounded and bad damage to the airplane. So we decided to do a little checking here, and our navigator, who had been ducking anti-aircraft fire and Zero fire in the navigator's compartment, finally decided it was time to start converting knots to miles and see where we were. The problem was that his tables ended at about 250 miles an hour, converting to knots, and here we were cruising along at 320. So we got into trouble trying to figure that out, and had in fact started a square search because we were lost. And we had started on our second round of the square search, and we spotted a smudge of smoke on the horizon, and we turned toward it, and sure enough, that was Sand Island burning. Well, we had it made until we started our procedures for landing and discovered that there wasn't any hydraulic pressure, since that was all destroyed. One wheel was shot off. The airplane was handling at slower speeds real bad. And we got on a final approach and thought, well, this is it. We've got it made now. And the Marines didn't know who we were, and they cut loose with their anti-aircraft weapons and drove us back out to sea. And we couldn't pull the gear up because we didn't have any hydraulic fluid. Couldn't do anything with the flaps. And their engines were getting awfully tired, and the airplane was flying bad. So in the next round, when we got on finally, we had to come in and land. There was no place else to go. And whether they suddenly realized that we were friendly or not, I don't remember, but they quit shooting, and we came in and made a reasonably decent landing and wound up nosing down into one of the revetments because the one wheel was gone, and when we finally got stopped, the airplane shook itself so badly in the landing that the instrument panel had fallen out. The bomb sight had fallen off the mounts and was down laying in the plexiglass. Poor old girl was in bad shape. And we got them finally unloaded and got the wounded out and got them some medical attention and went back and started counting. And one side there were over 500 holes, just on one side. We never did count the other side. And the Marines came along with their tractor and drug us off down into a revetment and said, we have to get you out of the way here. So we started digging foxholes and waiting then for the Japs to come in and get at us. But the airplane itself was shot something horrible. And as you looked at the blades of the propeller, you wonder how they held on with all the holes that were in the imbalance. But they did. They just shook a bit, but they, not one blade was damaged beyond use. The engines were dripping oil and the gas tanks were all oozing gas. They weren't pouring out because we had the self-sealing tank. But the airplane was tough. It was extremely tough. And I doubt seriously that regular combat airplane could have stood up to it as the B-26 did. The last I saw of 1392 was when I left there. She was sitting in the revetment, and I guess it's still out there for all I know. And ducking and dodging, I'm sure that if the flying safety people would have been with us, they would have wondered what in the world had gone on. In trying to get away from a fighter who's blasting you, nobody ever told me how to get away from one of them. If you can't outrun them, I know you can't outrun the bullets. And in desperation, I mean, when they really poured it into us, and keep in mind that little 3/8 steel plate that was behind the back, when you can hear those rounds ricocheting off there, you get a little bit disturbed. And you can't get away from them by climbing. You can't get away from them by diving or turning. So just without ever thinking, really, I'd roll the wheel as far as I could to the right and push full left rudder. Now, imagine a clip-wing B-26 going along at 300 miles an hour and suddenly have full right wheel and full left rudder all at the same time. What happens? That thing goes from here 10 miles over there before you know what's happening. Well, I'd get away from them. It worked. So from that moment on, when they'd start blasting us, I'd roll wheel and push rudder, go shooting off over here a ways. And it worked. I didn't invent it, I'm sure. I don't know what happened. I just did it. If anybody was to say, what did you contribute as a B-26 fighter group going out? What did you contribute to that battle? I would say this. It caused the Japanese fighters to stay in the water. The Navy's airplanes coming in from the carriers were on the deck. We were on the deck. The TBFs were on the deck, dropping torpedoes. You couldn't be over 150 feet because the torpedo wouldn't function if you were over 150 feet. It had to enter the water at a certain angle, and that was predetermined at 150 feet at 150 knots. So they were down shooting us, and the dive bombers off of our carriers managed to get in at whatever altitude was reasonably high for those type of airplanes, and made their dives and got their hits. And then it was too late for the Zeros. Nothing they could do about it anymore. And they hit them all. I mean, those dive bombers hit every carrier. And where were the Japs going to land? They had to land in the ocean. They could no longer get on the carrier.